I know how to stand up to a man.
Okay.
I'm white, and I've got everything I need. No one clutches their purses when they're in a room alone with me. And I can drive through any neighborhood I please at any hour, and the police don't do a thing. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I got everything I need. I'm a guy getting paid more than a girl with a degree. And I can walk down the streets after dark, no one wants to rape me. And I can get a girl pregnant and just as easily flee. Just like my straight white male dad did to me. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. I've got a pile of broken mirrors and I'm walking under ladders and I'm spilling tons of salt, but to me that doesn't matter, cause my skin and my gender and my orientation are the best things to have if you live in this nation. I recommend it highly. If I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. Shit's gonna work out for me, cause I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need.
Hey everyone, welcome to the season finale of the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We do this show live every Wednesday. All year fucking round, 7 p.m. Pacific, right here on Twitch, twitch.tv/EchoplexMedia. Also simulcasting some other places, but like whatever. You can support this project by going to echoplexmedia.com and clicking the support tab. The best way to support is the memberships or the merch over there at Fourth Wall. But also you can just give me money, just streamlabs.com/echoplexmedia. That works too. I'm producer Dave. You can find me on Grindr. I appear to be flying solo this evening. HK is on adventures, I assume. Moving is hard, so he'll probably be back for the season opener next Wednesday, which coincidentally will be my birthday, turning 29 again next Wednesday. What a way to celebrate. We're going to watch the dumbest people pretending to be smart on the internet. I know that's what you want to do for your birthday, so that's what I'm doing for mine. Anyway, this isn't great. This thing we're about to watch, I mean, it's appropriate that we are finishing the season this way, because it is once again, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris have had an extended, pedantic, and probably infuriating conversation during which they will pretend to disagree profoundly, but, you know, they'll just really kind of glad hand with each other, I'm presuming. Let's start this.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased.
Hello, everyone. Happy day.
Tour for 2024. Beginning in early February and running through June, Tammy and I and an assortment of special guests are going to visit 51 cities in the U.S. You can find out more information about this on my website, jordanbpeterson.com, as well as accessing all relevant ticketing information.
Oh, don't go to that.
Use the tour to walk through some of the ideas I've been working on in my forthcoming book, out November 2024, We Who Wrestle with God.
Oh, dear.
I'm looking forward to this. I'm thrilled to be able to...
12 Rules for God.
I'll be pleased to see all of you again soon. Bye-bye.
So the moral confusion here is that you have many well-educated people who will make very fine-grained distinctions about moral norms in the context of living in 21st century America. They'll consider words to be violence, and the misgendering of people to be a profound microaggression. But you ask them to consider whether someone like Malala Yousafzai was badly treated by the Taliban.
Wait, what?
And they become tongue-tied.
But that's because they don't know who the fuck that is, Sam.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Today, I have the opportunity to talk to Sam Harris once again. Sam and I have spoken many times, and usually publicly in the past, trying to sort out our mutual understanding in relationship to such topics as, well, morality fundamentally. Both Sam and I are convinced to the core of our beings, you might say, that there is a true and not merely relative distinction between good and evil, although we differ to some degree in how that distinction might be characterized and what the fact of that distinction means with regard to belief. And so every time I talk to Sam, I'm interested in trying to understand, for example, what he really means by objecting to the religious propositions that he does object to as one of the horsemen of...
Oh, for fuck's sake. Oh, no, it's going to be this one again. Oh, God, I hate this one.
New atheist movement, so-called, especially given that Sam is also committed to what you might describe as a religious practice. He's an avid meditator and certainly believes that spiritual experience is not only real, but perhaps the most real form of experience that's available to us. So we're going to hash through that again to try to distinguish
the same conversation
dogma and
again.
knowledge,
Great.
to try to distinguish between religious experience per se, or the religious experience that's valuable, and a counterproductive totalitarian dogmatism, and to try to lay that all out with forays into the domains of, well, meditative practice and
Happy New Year, everyone.
occasional description and discussion of the political. So it's good to see you again, Sam. And
Yeah, Jordan.
I think the first thing that I will ask you about is, I'm just curious. We haven't talked for, I think it's almost a year now. I believe that's the case. And so the first thing I'm curious about is, what are you up to?
It feels like 2 years. I feel like our last conversation was in the very depths of COVID, and I was in some basement lair. So I
you live in
gotta be
Malibu.
2 years.
There's no basements.
Things are great. I mean, it's really a nice time of life. It's nice with the family. It's nice professionally. It's just I'm in a good spot. It's I'm all too aware that things can change. So I'm enjoying my moment.
No, they can't.
But it's really,
Not for
it's really
you.
a beautiful period of life.
Yeah, so what's good?
What's good,
In
homie?
terms of just how I spend my time day to day, it really has become a semi-seamless machine for producing well-being. I mean, it's really, I'm doing what I want to do moment to moment, and
Being rich is
finding
helpful.
lots of people who want me to do it. So it's just there's not much distance between what I have to do, certainly professionally, and what I would do anyway, just because I want to do it. So it's I count myself as extraordinarily lucky to have found my
Trust fund? Like, this guy would have never had to work his entire life, regardless if he would have become a somewhat famous public intellectual. And nobody ever brings that up.
my path here, and that it's working. So it's yeah. I mean, I have no complaints. It would be indecent to complain about anything personally at this point, except for the passage of time and the implications of that, which I know all too well.
Yeah, well, I would say that you look both younger and happier than you did the last time I saw you. And, you know, I got quite attuned in my clinical practice to watching people's faces, obviously, but also seeing to some degree the way that they're set habitually, you know, and you look very good. And so I'm very happy to hear it. You said something I think
He's aging better than Ben
particular
Stiller.
interest to me is that you have managed, and also attribute this to some degree to good fortune, to bring together what you have to do with what you would want to do. And
Really helps when your mom was had that Golden Girls
a
money.
sign of optimality of function, as well as the good fortune that we just described. And so what is it that you think that you're doing that's enabled you? I mean, I know that you've been concentrating to a large degree on meditative practice, for example, but what is it that you think you've done to your attitude, let's say, to your patterns of attention that have
He got the fuck off Twitter. So now, like, when people dunk on him, he doesn't see it.
enabled you to bring what you need to do and what you want to do in alignment?
Well, this has been happening for quite some time. I would say that this has been, it's taken me 20 years to fully get my professional life and my core interests to gel. And so part of that is having built out platforms where I can just follow my interests and follow the kind of the needs of the moment, whether it's responding to something that's in the news or just figuring out what I'm most want to pay attention to in a given day or week.
He used to name search himself on Twitter every 30 minutes.
Podcast Making Sense, and I have the app Waking Up, which is it started at narrowly focused as a meditation app, but it's much more of an applied philosophy app at this point. It's just expanded beyond meditation, and it's expanded well beyond my contributions to it. So it's there are many other people on it, and so I can bounce between those two platforms, however I see fit. And they're while superficially they're similar because they're just me pushing MP3 files out to the world. They're just audio platforms in the end. They're totally unlike one another with respect to the kinds of topics I tend to engage and the kinds of interactions with the world that provokes. So it's really quite, it's almost like I'm living.
But like they're not disconnected in the way that he's saying. We watched an episode or we listened to an episode of his podcast where he said that people couldn't really understand his point of view if they had not sufficiently meditated or something along those lines. Like you couldn't really understand what he was saying if you had not achieved some kind of spiritual enlightenment. And I may be like overstating what he said, but not by a whole hell of a lot.
Lives simultaneously, because I'm waking up the app, I get, it's no exaggeration to say it. It's almost uniformly just pure positivity coming back at me. Apart from the occasional software glitch that crashes somebody's phone, and we hear about that. It's just that there's no distance between what I'm intending to put out and the effect I'm hoping to have, and the effect that I in fact seem to be having.
But that's because the meditation app is like a paywalled, like walled garden where only people who really like Sam Harris are accessing the content.
The feedback. So, this was, this has been, it was launched almost exactly 5 years ago. So for 5 years, I've had this look at this kind of alternate life. It's almost like a counterfactual life to the one I hadn't managed to lead, where I could sidestep all pointless controversy and annoying, bad faith criticisms and just meet people.
Oh, annoying bad faith criticisms. That just means anybody who made fun of him. That's what he means when this guy says bad faith. I think Jordan too, when he talks about criticism being in bad faith, Brett and Eric too, they mean ridicule. They don't mean that you don't believe what you're saying, which is what bad faith would actually mean, that you're just saying it maybe to piss them off or to be a contrarian or to score like points or to clout chase or any of that. They literally just mean that you're making fun of them.
At a place where what I have to give is found valuable by them in precisely the way that I would hope, right? So it's like a purely positive encounter with legions of people, which again, because of my experience as an author and as a podcaster, I had lost sight of that even being a possibility, right? I had lost sight of the fact that there are people in this world who have careers where they don't get any grief from the world because the world just understands what they're putting out and they like it.
Yeah, but those people have chosen not to be public figures. These are people like my mom, or like many of you, most of you in the chat. You don't get any public grief for what you do at work because nobody in the fucking world, except for the people you work with and maybe your friends and family, even know what you do.
Like it, and they get paid for it, and it's a transaction that makes everybody happy. And So it's like opening a
Wait,
bakery
he thinks
where
that
everyone
people's
loves.
jobs, he's like, oh, there's just most people out there, their jobs are just transactional and everybody's happy. What? Again, if you've never had to take a job that you didn't want to pay your bills, then yeah, you would probably think that that's how everybody else lives.
Loves the scones, and it's there's just nothing bad about it. And yet I find that, and this, I'm sure you feel the same way. I can't stay merely in that lane because there are other topics of social importance that I feel a need to comment on. And so I have my podcast and public speaking or books or any other channel by which to do that. And mostly I'm doing my podcast for that. But so I still have a foot in the water of controversy. And I'm sure we'll get into some of those controversies here. But it's to have both is such a source of sanity, because I can just swim in whatever waters I want to swim in on a daily basis. So it's quite wonderful.
And he means in the pool in his backyard in Malibu.
So why do you, just out of curiosity, so while there's a substantial parallel, I would say, between the situation you're in and the situation that I'm in, given what you just described, because one of the reasons that I continue to tour continually, essentially, is because it's completely positive. And I engage in almost no political discussion, almost no culture war discussion, almost all.
This is incorrect.
Well, you talk about your waking up system, and I suppose I'm walking on a parallel line insofar as I'm encouraging people to aim up. And I don't know if there's any difference between waking up and aiming up. Perhaps there is, and we can talk about that. But it is a great relief to be in a domain that's entirely positive.
Isn't it great that we're having this conversation, part of the conversation? They're just drawing it out a lot.
But then it is interleaved for me, as it is for you, with some degree of combat, let's say, on the more philosophical and culture war side of things. Why have you concluded? Sometimes I wonder, Sam, if it wouldn't be just as well to stay in the positive domain all the time. And I know that you are no longer on Twitter, for example, and so that's obviously one of the places where you've detached yourself from the proliferation of, you might say, unnecessary and polarizing conflict. But you just did indicate that you feel either a moral obligation or an intellectual pull towards keeping abreast of the domain of life that constitutes more problems. And so why do you think that balance is necessary? Why don't you forego that entirely and stay within the domain of the positive? I mean, you seem to have concluded that balancing them is actually better for you in some sense, or maybe better in general. So why did you conclude that?
Yeah, well, it's a question I continue to ask myself because, you only have one life, or I would say you only have one life you can be sure of. And so why not live it in the happiest manner possible? But
like somebody in the chat said, he just got tired of people making fun of him on Twitter because the guy is kind of fun to make fun of because he takes himself so incredibly seriously, and he's not always he doesn't always hit the mark, and none of us always hit the mark. But he didn't seem to want the back and forth of Twitter where regular people can respond to what you're saying. I think he mostly left because Sam Cedar makes fun of him.
I do find that there are certain moments. First of all, my interests are wider than can be encompassed just by things like meditation and narrowly focusing on questions about how to live the most meaningful possible life. Right? It's not all just about maximizing mental pleasure or even one's ethical wisdom moment to moment. They're just things that interest me that I want to talk about that really don't belong over at Waking Up, but they do belong on my podcast. So talking about physics, say, right? That's just interesting, and I like to do that. So there's that. As you say, I deleted my Twitter account, which is is an important part of the answer to your first question of just what has gotten better for me in the last 12 months. That was, I really am embarrassed to say what a life hack that turned out to be, to get off Twitter.
Imagine you're like one of the smartest people in the world, or supposedly you're the smartest person in the world, and you're like, I have a great life hack. I went to this place. I said things. Most of them were, kind of milquetoast, boring, kind of center left or center right stuff. And then I'd just kind of while out about race or gender. And then people would make fun of me. And so I just deleted the place that people made fun of me. And now I'm happier again with my big pile of money. Wow. Fucking genius.
We can talk about why I did if you want, but the net result has been almost unambiguously positive. I mean, there's a slight sense, certainly when the things in the news are really heating up, that I could be missing something, or I'm not party to the conversation that's happening at that.
Sir, you could get a sock account that you just read Twitter on.
Kind of interval, where people are responding to things every 30 seconds. But the truth is, I don't have to be, because what I have found is that when you don't have an opportunity to just blurt out your instantaneous response to something that's happening in the news or something you saw in your timeline, and you have to let your response to it cure over the course of days. And
or you could be like, oh, I'm not going to tweet yet. I don't have all the information. I'm going to hold off on this one. I'm going to not get into this particular thing because I don't have the requisite body of knowledge and I haven't done enough reading on it. And then you just kind of see what other people are saying and try to feel it out. That's what I do with most issues that come up, especially like controversial ones. It's not that I don't have like my opinions about controversial issues. It's that I don't want to just be the take guy. And then he was just the take guy, and his takes were ranging from like boring and self-important to like bigoted and incorrect. And people made fun of both of those, actually, as you should.
Case, because I have to decide, okay, is this important enough for me to actually talk about it on my podcast? And I might not be podcasting again for another 3 days or even a week. And so many things don't survive that test. They just 98% of things just fall by the wayside because
yeah. It's like when you go shopping, right? Think about this. This is how you go shopping. You go, do I need this? What if I wait? And what am I giving up if I buy this? This is what you think this guy can't even go shopping, probably, because the Twitter version of that is, do I need to comment on this? Like the second one's the same. What if I wait? And what kinds of bad things might happen to me if I say something stupid about this? And like, I don't this is like what you teach like a middle schooler basically about self-control. And this guy just it doesn't seem like he's got that.
The truth is, you didn't have to broadcast your opinion about that thing that happened on that campus, by that indiscretion committed by that stupid blue-haired person, right? So it's just like you didn't have to weigh in, and you didn't have to reap all of the attendant poison of having weighed in, and you didn't have to worry about whether you should respond to that poison and those misunderstandings generated there. And I noticed in retrospect that, I dimly knew this when I was on Twitter, but I didn't fully appreciate it until I was off, that it was no exaggeration to say that basically every bad thing in my life, apart from the sickness of the people close to me, was a result of something I had done on Twitter, right? Or something that I had seen on Twitter.
I can relate to that
I felt I needed to respond to. So
that's because that's what happens. Like because we're all like, and this is just human nature. We're all the hero in our own story, or we like to think of ourselves this way. And so if we all think that it's us versus the world, me versus the world, we all think that. I don't care what anybody says. You think it's you versus the world in some way. And if you have never been in a situation where, for example, you could not get your material needs met because your mother was creatively and financially involved in one of the biggest television series that ever happened. And outside of that, your brother is a famous journalist who would also catch you if you fall. Then you don't have those struggles. And so you turn like people dunking on you on Twitter into you versus the world. What else, if you needed to have that battle, what else would it be if you were a public figure who talked about controversial issues?
Just this kind of hallucination machine that I had invited into the center of my life. And getting rid of it really modified my sense of not just what I have to do on a day-to-day basis and what I should do, but just of my own existence, right? Like there was something about my digital existence that was claiming too much real estate in my conception of myself as a person.
Yeah.
Right. And
you might have put your finger on it, at least to some degree there, with something like your observation about whether or not you're willing to put time into it. You know, I've had many discussions with my family about Twitter in particular, and I would tend to agree with you that much of the negativity that I do run into in my life is a consequence of Twitter. And so,
well, it's not a consequence because Twitter, honestly, I mean, it's worse now than ever, but it's just a communication platform. There's plenty of people on Twitter who just follow accounts. Maybe they're into muscle cars and they just follow accounts about muscle cars, and their experience on Twitter, if they just stay on the following tab, it's just fucking people talking about their muscle cars or people who are into aquariums or something. So you don't have to enter the culture war, and you can, to the extent that Twitter is a decent platform now, you can have decent experiences on there. But if you go in there like Sam does, like Jordan does, and like I have, and you're like, I am here for the culture war. I am here to dunk on people, tell people when they're wrong, try to gain influence and spread my ideas. Then that's the ticket you bought, and that's the ride that you're going to take. And you don't have to actually leave Twitter to get off the ride, right? Like if you don't like a particular ride at Disneyland, just don't get on that ride anymore. You can stay at Disneyland. If you don't like the churros, don't go to the churro stand.
now, I use Twitter to stay abreast of the sorts of things that you described that you might be able to get access to on Twitter as well, current events. And there is that temptation to respond immediately. But you intimated that maybe a good rule of thumb is something like, if you're not willing to sit down and think about it for an hour, let's say, then perhaps it's not important enough.
But I don't think like this and maybe other people are different than me, but if I'm like, well, here's a subject matter, I'm going to sit and think about it for an hour, I'll get about 5 minutes into that and get bored. Right? Because I don't know like what exactly I am going to accomplish by essentially talking to myself in my head about something that maybe I don't understand or don't have like a whole bunch of knowledge about. What if you spend an hour checking and seeing what other people who have maybe even different opinions than you, or people who have subject matter expertise, see what they're saying, spend an hour doing that before you decide whether or not it's time for you to weigh in? Because just sitting there and thinking about it is like, okay, then you sat and thought about it. So what? People think about things all the time.
Your opinion with millions of people and reap the consequences. You know, and Twitter is, although it's a social media platform that facilitates impulsivity, it's also a broad scale publishing platform. And it's not obvious that you should be publishing all your instantaneous responses to cultural events. And it's a funny thing for me because it's not that easy to dissociate that from responsibility. You know, I feel that I have a responsibility to bring to light, let's say, certain elements of the culture war that are going.
Okay, then you have delusions of grandeur. It is not your responsibility to tweet about the culture war. This is just not anybody's responsibility. It's not my responsibility. It's not Jordan's. It's not Sam's. It's not yours. This is not your responsibility. This sounds like the This sounds like, again, these, for different reasons, these people are both so financially well off that they actually don't have any responsibilities.
Going on at a deep level. And part of the reason that I use Twitter the way that I do use it is to do that. But then it does have that problem of intense negativity. And I learned from walking through airports with my wife, we had this discussion a couple of times. Airports have bothered me a lot ever since 9/11. I review them as, they're like for me, they're the bleeding edge of the totalitarian incursion into general day-to-day life.
The motherfucker, it's an airport and you fly first class. Get the fuck out of here.
And they've always made me very uncomfortable. I don't like lining up for the screenings, the theatrical screenings and so forth. And that made me very bitchy and hard to get along with in airports.
No, sir. I think you're just dispositionally that way. And yeah, I mean, nobody likes airports, but it's not that bad. Okay. Oh, you got to wait in line. Oh, well, fucking woe is you. You ever been to the fucking post office?
I had a conversation with my wife, a fairly detailed conversation, and our decision was, if I'm in an airport and something happens that annoys me but isn't important enough to actually sit down and write about, then I have to just ignore it or shut up about it. And this has also helped me calibrate my responses. And it's the same problem with Twitter, right? Is that something can be irritating and be genuinely irritating, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the most appropriate way to deal with it is to share your irritation in the moment.
Oh, you'd be so bad if you worked at an airport and you were like, middle management, like at the fucking TSA screening, and this guy got annoyed with somebody and wanted to talk to you. Oh, that's like fucking reason for hazard pay. Every moment, every fucking 5 minutes, this guy's complaining to you, you should get $500.
Part of the reason Twitter is so pathological, perhaps, and is such a snake pit of polarization is because it does encourage that kind of impulsive and immediate response to things that are perhaps of sufficient seriousness so that they should only be taken seriously.
Yeah, it encourages many things that I think are ultimately producing some consequential delusions for us individually and at scale. It provides a kind of an illusion of conversation because you'll tweet something at me, I'll tweet something at you, and we seem to be talking. But as you know, we're primarily talking in front of our respective audiences, which are different, which are largely different, right? So when I say something to you, it's my audience is at my back and vice versa. So much communication becomes performative, and that starts to degrade the kind of the good faith characteristics of a real conversation, and people just wind up scoring points on each other. And
and you end up losing, like most of the time. People with much smaller audiences than him have just been able to dunk on him.
It encourages that. That's the kind of thing, dunks are the kind of thing that tend to go viral.
But they don't go viral just because they're mean. It goes viral because people find it funny, and usually because there's something true about it, something that people find interesting. The problem here is that a lot of the people that go after him and Jordan are actually kind of funny. They'll make funny videos about them using these people's content, and these people are both deeply unfunny. And so they can't really deploy that. And so when that's deployed against them in the battle of ideas, they fucking lose. And they don't like it.
For a kind of dishonesty, there's an ethic where there are very few people feel a real need. I mean, certainly anyone who's any kind of activist, politically, left or right, doesn't feel much of a need to really get their opponent's position correct before savaging it. They don't mind distorting it, especially if they can use clips of their opponent that have been artfully edited so as to make them seem to be saying something they weren't in fact saying in context.
Oh, I don't think you could level that criticism at the intellectual Dollar Tree. The show gets a little tiring sometimes because we get the whole context. We watch the whole thing.
They will use that as a way of just smearing the person. You want to hold someone accountable for the worst possible version of what they might have said, however implausible it really is, as long as that can be made to stick. And people just see what can be made to stick, and they almost never go back and clean up their, apologize for their errors and go back and clean up their mess. And people do this, people, when blue check marks meant something, there were a lot of blue check marks who would behave this way, right? And
so like he's, again, just like leaving out the fact that like if you clip somebody out of context and they said something funny and stupid, that's funny.
Journalists or people who are treated as journalists. And I, as a point of principle, really have always tried to avoid that. I mean, whenever I get somebody's views wrong, however odious I find their views or how odious I find them as a person, I apologize for that and correct the record. But I found
I think you'll do it, but you'll do it for people who you view to be like, I guess, kind of culturally and dispositionally part of your tribe. Like he would do it for a Tucker Carlson, but not for Noam Chomsky. He would do it for, if he originally got it right about Doug Murray and was like, oh, this guy's a bit of a white supremacist. He'd do it for Doug Murray, but not for Sam Cedar, etc. So I don't think he does that. I think he does that when people are, I guess when people are big fans of academic window dressing like he is. Like if he got me wrong, like first of all, I would absolutely throw a party if he mentioned me on his podcast. But if he got me wrong, I don't think he'd come back and be like, oh, I got this guy wrong. I don't think he'd bother doing it.
Continually in dialogue with people who didn't play by those rules. So it's set up to bring out the worst in us and to degrade conversation way more fully than it's ever degraded in person. I mean, the thing that convinced me to get off Twitter is that I was seeing people behave like psychopaths by the tens of thousands, and I knew there couldn't be that many psychopaths, right? I knew these people couldn't be this dishonest or malicious in their lives. And in fact, in many cases, I knew this because I knew some of the people. I had dinner with some of the people. And you and I have mutual friends and colleagues.
Ooh, Gay Dave having dinner with Sam Harris would be a very much the same experience as watching this podcast and watching, because I wouldn't I wouldn't want to get kicked out the fucking restaurant and shit, right? But I don't think that I would just be super kind to him if we had dinner.
These people. And yet I was seeing the absolute worst in them in terms of how they were engaging on Twitter, not just with me, but with other people who, they felt they needed to slam. And I mean, we're seeing some of this. I mean, I think there's something like this happening. I haven't really followed it, but over the Daily Wire, I mean, you're very close to you. You've got Candace and Ben attacking each other.
So what if this guy leaves, doesn't really leave open the possibility that people who are harshly criticizing one another truly believe the criticism that they're leveling at one another. He thinks that because it's harsh or rude or mocking, that it must all just be to score points. And it must all just be a performance. And I don't believe that. I think that's a wild thing to believe. I think that when people criticize other people, they usually mean what they're saying.
I would argue that kind of thing is not only spilling out onto Twitter, it very likely wouldn't happen but for the existence of Twitter. And there are many things happening out in the real world.
No, it would just play out, Sam, it would just play out on Facebook.
Happen in response to something that's seen on Twitter. But then like many of these protests, these pro-Palestinian protests that have become such concern to many of us, especially on college campuses where you have otherwise very educated people expressing solidarity with true ethical monsters in Hamas.
What?
What we're seeing.
Weren't they complaining about campus free speech like just a couple of years ago? Like, again, he wants to deny the agency of people who are involved in a protest that he thinks is wrong. He thinks that those people are just evil because they're protesting a thing that he thinks they shouldn't be protesting. And it's not because they've thought about it and believe it. And, crowds act weird, and you'll get a couple assholes in a crowd who do dumb things. No worries there. No disagreement there. At a party, you get it. So at a protest, you're going to get it too. But he just constantly does this, where he just thinks that people who don't view things his way have not thought it through. And he's just suggesting that they don't have agency of their own, essentially. And to be fair, he also doesn't believe in free will. But I don't think that's the same conversation or whatever.
Seen is something's getting provoked by imagery on Twitter, however half-baked, and then the response to it in the streets is performative because it's meant for the streets, but it's really meant to be broadcast back on Twitter, right? I mean, that people wouldn't be doing these things, but for the omnipresence of cell phones.
What the fuck?
It can be broadcast back.
What does he think protest used to look like before Twitter, or even before the ubiquity of television? What does he think protest used to look like? Do you think the fucking suffragettes, when they were engaged in protest, were just having like high-minded conversations with a pocket watch and a monocle?
Onto social media. And so I just think we have built this reinforcement cycle for ourselves, this kind of feed-forward loop of that has eroded our capacity to speak rationally to one another and to have good faith debates and even strong arguments. And it's produced a machine for amplifying the narcissistic tendency of everyone wanting to just manufacture outrage. So,
I think there's something, and you're pointing at this. I actually think there's something that's technically going on, particularly with Twitter, and maybe it's proportionate to the degree to which a social media communication system capitalizes on immediacy of response. Like, I'm afraid that we're setting up virtual environments. They're virtual perceptual environments and communication environments that aren't well matched to the underlying reality, which means they're delusional. And the delusional direction of Twitter is in the direction of enabling psychopathic behavior. Now, there's a research literature that's emerging on that. So you see the people who are most likely to troll online, so to post things that they know perfectly well will do nothing but cause trouble, are dark tetrad types. They're Machiavellian, narcissistic, psychopathic, and sadistic. And then,
but sometimes trolling is just funny. It's like this guy would have hated the court jester.
So it does bring those people out of the woodwork to a much greater degree than might be otherwise expected. But I also think, as you pointed out, that it does the same thing to those fragmentary psychopathic tendencies that exist in everyone. It's a psychopathy facilitator. And the degree to which that is driving polarization in the broader culture is indeterminate. I think it might be driving almost all of it.
Right.
Because my online life and my real life are so different that they almost bear no relationship to one another. And I suspect this is something that you said you've been discovering, particularly as a consequence of working in the waking up space. All the interactions I have with people in public, in my actual life, are unbelievably positive, with the exception of perhaps 1 in 5,000. Now, the 1 in 5,000 can be quite unpleasant, but it's statistically negligible.
But this is, wait a minute. That's because the people you choose to hang out with are the people you choose to hang out with. And when you're on Twitter, which is like a more like a public conversation, essentially, Those aren't the people you've chosen to hang out with. That's just everybody on Twitter who happens upon what you're saying and might respond to it.
If you derived your expectation of my experience from the online world, you'd expect that, half the people that I ran into would be people that hated me. And simply, the lack of concordance is so remarkable that it does look like the difference between a delusion and reality.
But there's also something to be said for if you're going to dunk on someone that you see on Twitter and they're a public figure and you see them walking down the street, maybe you just fucking leave them alone. Because they're a person walking down the street, so you just leave them alone. There's a ton of people I dunk on Twitter. I wouldn't fucking just immediately start an argument with them when I saw them walking down the street. That's fucking crazy.
I think it's unbelievably dangerous. We have no idea what it means to compress people to the point where their communication tilts heavily in the psychopathic direction. We have no idea what the broad-scale social consequences of that might be.
Yeah, I share your experience. Again, my encounters in public are almost uniformly positive. I think obviously there's a possibility of a selection effect there, that the only people who are likely to come up to you are the people who have something nice to say, and then you have other people who are recognizing you, who are just holding their tongues and they don't like you.
Yeah, even Sam is like, well, wait a minute. Yeah, because you can't just you can't just walk around in the real world looking for conflict. There is a difference between Twitter and the real world, and that's fine.
And we're both controversial figures, and I have to think that some percentage of the people who notice us in public are people who are not fans and just don't say anything. But still, I've seen the effect. Yeah,
I don't think I'd walk up to either of these people and start arguing with them. Well, there'd be nothing for me to gain, and they might be able to use that encounter like in a way that either makes me look bad or makes them look like they've been abused in some way. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. If I was at a dinner party and sat next to Sam and had to listen to him hold court for a while, yeah, I'd eventually fucking say something. But that's a different thing than seeing him walking down the street.
I've joined the two groups. I know what it's like to deal with the same person on Twitter in front of their fans versus over dinner, and it's they're miles apart. And I just see there's so it is corrosive even in the best case when we're not talking about anonymous trolls who are hiding behind their anonymity and just savaging you. These are people with real reputations who you actually know and will likely meet again in person, and yet Twitter brings out the absolute worst in them. I mean, for me, the very large, the 800-pound canary in the coal mine for me is Elon. I mean, look at what Twitter has done to Elon's life. Right? It's just, Elon used to be a friend. He's somebody I knew reasonably well. His engagement with Twitter has been catastrophic for
yeah, because they'd both go to a Hollywood party, and by the end of the party nobody else wanted to talk to either of them, so there they were chatting with each other.
Person, from my point of view, I mean, it's clearly a compulsion. I mean, he was so addicted to it that he felt he needed to buy the platform, but it is his use of it has been so irresponsible and produced such, forget about the harm he's produced in other people's lives. And nothing I'm saying now it relates to changes he's made to the platform. I mean, that's a separate thing that we can talk about. I've always been agnostic as to whether or not he could actually improve Twitter as a platform, and he may yet wind up doing that. But I'm just talking about the way he has personally used it as a user of the platform, and the way he's interacted with people and signal boosted massively the profiles of anonymous QAnon lunatic trolls, right? I mean, he's been completely cavalier in who he interacts with, all the while knowing that anyone he boosts suddenly gets 1 million followers and has a platform that
they don't get 1 million followers from an Elon boost.
So I look at him and I think, all right, if someone of his talent who has so many other good things to do with his 24 hours in any given day is is this derailed by this platform? Is using it this compulsively to the obvious degradation of his reputation in most circles that count, right? I mean, he's not, he can't be canceled because he's produced so many useful things, and embedded with things that everyone still wants. But man, if he were a little less productive, in space and on the ground.
Yeah, but he's like standing on the shoulders of the people who did the actual work for these things.
We would never, he'd be the next Alex Jones in terms of the way mainstream culture would view him. And it's been terrible to see, right? It's been very depressing to see.
I want to read Jordan Peterson's notebook. He keeps either writing or pretending to write things like during this conversation. I want to see that notebook.
And I guess I can blame him, but I blame the stimulus more. I blame Twitter. I mean, for whatever reason, he has found this to be the most addictive thing in his life. And he's been willing to totally torch relationships over his use of it.
Let me ask you this question. Are you at peace with the mindless green tire and soybean and
fuck this ad?
Yeah, well, it's definitely the case that one of the cardinal dangers of Twitter is its propensity to bring out the worst in people and the worst in the culture. I mean, I guess it's an open question whether or not Musk's takeover of Twitter will result in the dramatic improvements to the platform that might justify the risk inherent in engaging with it. So let's leave that a bit, Sam.
Sure.
I want to turn our attention, if you don't mind, to some of the deeper issues that you and I have discussed. And I have a bunch of questions for you. So the first thing I want to do is clarify something. My recollection of particularly our last conversation, and it was one that I found clarified my understanding of your thought to a greater degree than our previous conversations we had, probably because I listened to you more, was that, and so correct me if I get this wrong, because I want to use it as a platform to ask you some other questions. My understanding after that conversation was that you were driven to search for an objective foundation for moral claims, primarily because you had become convinced of the existence of, for lack of a better term, of evil in the world, and were looking for solid ground to stand on in your attempts to both understand and combat the most malevolent proclivities. We could leave it at that. Now, is that a reasonable conclusion? Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think my motive will be pretty familiar to you. This came largely out of the collisions I was having with people after I wrote my first two books, The End of Faith and Letter to a Christian Nation, where I was noticing disproportionately on the left, specifically, I mean, we've come full circle now to this moment, in the news cycle, but mostly in response to my criticism of Islamic extremism and the kind of the urgency with which I was saying that the Islamic doctrines of martyrdom and jihad are sincerely believed by millions of people, and these beliefs have real consequences in the world.
So a lot of people that he had collisions with probably didn't read those books, or probably found those books to be non-controversial. I think the collisions have been more about the articles he's written and the things he's tweeted and the people he's been associated with, not his books.
Good ones, right? And we should talk about that honestly. What I was getting mostly from the left was, what struck me as pure masochistic delusion, but it was on its own side a very sophisticated philosophy of postmodernist truth claims about the relativity of everything, which in the minds of its adherents left us with no solid ground to stand on ever when making claims about right and wrong and good and evil. So, I mean, the point where it became, and this is something that this is actually a scene I wrote verbatim in my third book, The Moral Landscape, which is where I laid out my argument on this topic. I was at the Salk Institute at a conference that had been organized. It was either in 2006 or 2007, I believe. And I had said something disparaging about the Taliban in my remarks about the relationship between moral values and our growing scientific understanding of the human mind and human well-being. And I said, something that I should have been uncontroversial in that context. I'm at the Salk Institute, this preeminent scientific institution down in La Jolla, which is one of the nicest places on earth. With an auditorium filled with well-heeled people who appear to be enjoying their political freedom and their freedom of speech and freedom of everything. And I said something about we just know whatever remains to be discovered about the nature of morality and human value and human well-being. We know that the Taliban don't have it perfectly right. Right. So whatever the optimal way of living is, we know that the Taliban haven't found it. Right. We know that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not an optimal strategy for maximizing human well-being.
Right. But the problem is this would probably be the 950th time or something that he said that.
A woman academic, and she actually happened to be, or was later, a scientific advisor to President Obama for medical ethics, came up to me and said, "Well, that's just your opinion, right?" And so then this led me to realize just how,
I mean, that is your opinion,
the rot had spread. That even here is someone who is a woman academic who's enjoying all the freedom of however hard.
He's getting kind of close to that. Well, if the Taliban was ruling, you wouldn't have the right to say that to me. He's getting awful close to that shit right here.
They can be found in Western society. Presumably, this is a person who would have responded to the Me Too movement and all its moral urgency with alacrity. She was still open-minded, at least in the context of talking to me, about the treatment of women and girls under the Taliban, right? And
well, no. She wasn't. She said that was your opinion that the Taliban, or that someone from the Taliban might not have some moral or ethical revelation, and I tend to not agree that I don't know. Maybe there is someone in the Taliban who might have some great moral or ethical revelation about something. Who fucking knows?
I detail our further conversation again verbatim in my book, because I was so astounded by the exchange that I turned on my heels literally in mid-sentence, walked straight back to my room and wrote down exactly what the two of us had said, because I just could not believe what had happened. So the moral confusion here is that you have many well-educated people who will make very fine-grained distinctions about moral norms in the context of living in 21st century America. They'll consider words to be violence, and the misgendering of people to be a profound microaggression.
Well, words can be violence, Sam. We have laws in every Western country about, for example, conspiracy to commit murder that is prosecuted as a violent crime, and it mostly involves words.
Halloween costumes that culturally appropriate, et cetera, are anathema. This is how finely calibrated their moral scruples are over here, in the quad of an American university. But you ask them to consider whether someone like Malala Yousafzai was badly treated by the Taliban, and they become tongue-tied, right? They will even say things like, "Well, who are we to criticize an ancient culture?" So that motivated me to say, all right, the smartest, most well-educated people in our society have become unmoored to any vision of objective moral values, right? They have, worse, they have become anchored to a belief that objectivity with respect to moral values is impossible, and certainly science will never have anything to say about it. And
not that science will never have anything to say about it, but the idea that there are like objective moral values that exist outside of our minds and are like outside of like social constructions, I don't believe that either. I think that that morality and ethics can only come from our beliefs.
So they've ceded this ground to dogmatic religion, right? And someone like Stephen Jay Gould did this when he had this conception of the non-overlapping magisteria between religion and science, right? So science talks about facts and what is, but religion talks about what should be and the totality of human values. And I think that's never been a tenable way of dividing the pie. But it has this obvious defect that where people who lose their religious convictions are then left standing on apparently nothing when it comes time to say something like slavery is wrong. I mean, you literally have professors saying, well, I don't like slavery. I don't happen to like it. I wouldn't want a slave, but I can't really say it's wrong from the point of view of the universe, right? I mean,
well, yeah, the universe doesn't care about us. It's a dumb thing to talk about, I think. But if you ask me, does the universe care about slavery? I'd be like, no. But people do.
That's not what science does. And my point is that morality, and this is perhaps something you're going to want to disagree with, but in my view, morality has to relate to the suffering and well-being of conscious creatures. I mean, not even limiting it to humans, but just whatever can possibly suffer or be made happy in this universe is a possible theater of moral concern. And we know that conscious minds must be arising in some way in conformity to the laws of nature. I mean, so whatever is possible for conscious minds is a statement about, at bottom, a final scientific understanding of what minds are and what consciousness is and how those things are integrated with the physics of things. And so there have to be right answers to the question of how to navigate from the worst possible suffering for everyone to places on the moral landscape that are quite a bit better than that, where there's beauty and creativity and joy of a sort that we can only dimly imagine. And the question of how to do that and what that landscape looks like, it's a fact-based discussion about science at every level that could be relevant to the conscious states of conscious mind. So it's a discussion about genetics and psychology and neurobiology and sociology and economics and sciences as yet uninvented with respect to causality in this place. And so that's my argument, that we need a spirit of consilience across the domain of facts and values. And so there's more to say there, but I'll stop.
Okay. Well, so I'm gonna pick up a couple of themes there. So one of the things that you pointed to was the incoherence manifested by this woman and like people in relationship to micro narratives and macro narratives. So you said that it was in your opinion, that she or the people who she might represent would be perfectly willing to be upset about some relatively minor issue that might arise on a university campus, like the wearing of inappropriate Halloween costumes, but are...
okay, so here's another thing is what do you have domain, what do you have the ability to influence? This is the same argument about, well, why are you so interested in local politics, but you just vote for the president and don't spend a lot of time talking about the president? It's the same argument. Like if people like try to make that argument, I'm like, why are you upset that someone's engaged locally and just votes for whoever for the president and kind of lets it be? They're making he's making a version of that dumb argument. The reason that this person who's a university professor is able to is concerned with the things happening on the university and takes action and makes statements about the things happening at the university is because those things are happening within what, half a mile of their office? And so they have the ability to effect what they believe to be positive change at the university where they work.
Inherent in relationship to making broader scale moral claims. Now, one of the claims of the postmodernists, this was put forward most particularly by, who was it now, who said that there were no meta-narratives. The postmodernism is fundamentally disallowance of the idea that any uniting meta-narratives are possible. I'll remember his name momentarily.
It could be Derrida or Foucault or...
No, it's
but postmodernism is literally the school of thought that came after modernism, and it is skeptical of some of the grand narratives of modernism, but not all of them all of the time.
It's not. He's the guy who generated simulation theory, another Frenchman.
No. Le Pen? Or
No.
Baudrillard? It's a rogues gallery.
Baudrillard. It's Baudrillard.
Yeah, it's a rogues gallery.
Yeah, it's Baudrillard. Yeah. Okay, so here's the problem with that. Well, the problem with that in part is that there's no united action and perception at any level without a uniting narrative. So, for example, if I pick up a glass to move a cup from the table to my lips, I have to organize all those extraordinarily complex actions, right, which cascade up from the molecular level through the musculature of my body. I have to organize that into something that's coherent and unified in order to bring about any action whatsoever. And what that implies is that there's a hierarchy of uniting structure. And what the postmodernists do is arbitrarily make that halt at a certain level. It's like, so you're allowed a uniting narrative or structure up to a certain level, but beyond that, you're not allowed.
Well, no, you're allowed whatever you want. Like people who don't think that they have the answer for every person on the planet. That's not postmodernism. That's sort of what they're saying, is that that they think that the postmodernists should have a grand meta narrative for everyone on the planet. And you don't. I don't. You don't. They don't.
At all. And that's the point at which the meta narrative emerges. And those are now forbidden. And I don't understand that, because I think that it's a distinction between a narrative and a meta narrative it's an arbitrary distinction. And you can't attend or act without a uniting narrative. So now you seem to be pointing to something like that. So let me walk through your argument. You pointed to the Taliban.
I'll add one other, which I think is a simpler defeater, which is that the claim is that there can be no universal values, right? A universal truth claim with respect to right and wrong and good and evil. And yet they tacitly make the universal claim that tolerance of this ethical diversity is better than intolerance, right? So there.
But that's not a universal claim of right and wrong. That's a claim of better than, worse than. Right and wrong are absolutes. Better than, worse than exist on a spectrum. Why are these people? Why is this guy like? How is what he's saying smart? It's black and white thinking. It's a false dichotomy. It's like one of the first logical fallacies that you learn about.
And is we need to find some space in our minds to tolerate the difference of opinion offered by the Taliban or Hamas or some other
yeah, actually. Sure. You can tell them they're wrong and to go fuck themselves, but in the end, what are you going to do? Now, when that opinion informs behavior, different people in different places in the world, different organizations can decide whether or not to intervene if they believe that's the right thing to do. But just a viewpoint, these people are all we'll watch a video after this from Quillette, which is largely politically aligned with the two of these, and they're going to complain about the lack of viewpoint diversity in Australian universities. So I don't understand I don't understand.
But that doesn't make any sense. That's an appeal to tolerance. One that the Taliban and Hamas don't share, right? So we're tolerating their intolerance. But it's also the tacit claim.
Well, but we aren't. They're not doing anything. Like, we're on the other side of the fucking world from them. And our attempts and the West's attempts to intervene over there have only made things worse. So what are we supposed? Oh, is it just about fucking? Do you disavow the Taliban? Because okay, I disavow the Taliban. Okay, what now? Like, okay. Like, okay, what now? Like, then what? Are we done? Have we solved the fucking morality problem? Because I suppose a postmodernist, he would probably think I am, have disavowed the Taliban. Okay, now we've solved that problem. Then what? So what? That doesn't mean anything.
Tolerance is better. Tolerance on our own side is better.
Tolerance is the uniting narrative.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you see the same thing with the postmodern insistence. This is particularly true of people like Foucault, that nothing rules but power. Right?
Foucault dead.
Because Foucault saw power making itself manifest everywhere. And the fundamental postmodernist claim is that there's no uniting meta-narratives, but that didn't stop the postmodernists for a second in making the claim that you could find power relations underlying every single form of human action and social interaction. So
I think he's misrepresenting things. I think he's grossly misrepresenting someone's work here. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this stuff, but that sounds like an absolute, like a very absolute, like there's no power relationship between me and somebody I've never met. I mean, there might be an economic power disparity that would play out if we met or if we had to negotiate about something. Sure. Actually, now that I think about it, yeah, power is in human interaction. Yeah, power disparities do always exist. They don't always manifest themselves, but they certainly exist.
But this meta-narrative, this uniting narrative, see, you point to it in a way that I think that points out to me a very fundamental element of agreement between the positions that you and I have taken, even though we've had so much apparent disagreement.
Oh, when are you going to get to that part?
You point to the Taliban and you say, at minimum, we can say with some degree of certainty that what the Taliban are doing is not optimal. Okay, and you said that's a claim that's so weak in a way that it should just be self-evident, right? You know what I mean by weak? It's like, Isn't that obvious? Well, I started in my investigations at a more extreme point, I would say. I looked at the camp guard in Auschwitz who enjoyed his work and thought, I don't know what good is, but at minimum, it's the opposite of whatever the hell that is. And so that was a starting point for me. And it seems to me,
but now you've gone just to the absolute worst example. Yeah. Okay. I disavow that camp guard too. Now we can move on. Fantastic.
What you're doing is that you put your foot firmly on the head of evil and say, well, this is a starting point. And even though we can't define good, we can define it as the opposite of whatever this is. And so does that seem like a reasonable point of agreement between us?
Yeah,
as far as you're concerned.
Yeah, although I think this is perhaps a different topic, but it certainly adjacent to what you just said. I think there's some ethical paradoxes here which would be interesting to consider, because I think most of human evil of the sort that you and I are now describing doesn't require the presence of actually evil people, right? I think there are evil people. I think there are true psychopaths and sadists for whom it is true to say that if evil means anything, it should be applied to their conscious states and their psychology. But so much of what we consider to be evil, and so much of what produces needless human misery, is the result of otherwise normal people psychologically behaving terribly because they believe fairly crazy and unsupportable things about what reality is and how they should live within it. So I would by no means ever want to suggest, in fact I'm at pains to say otherwise whenever I can remember to, that all jihadists or even most jihadists or all Nazis or even most Nazis were psychopaths, right? I mean, the horror of these belief systems is not that they act like bug lights for the world's psychopaths, and you attract a lot of people who would be doing terrible things anyway, and they just happen to start doing it in this new context, let's say under the Islamic State. No, you certain ideologies attract totally normal people who would otherwise be totally recognizable to us psychologically and socially as good, normal people, but for the fact that they got convinced that, of whatever the relevant dogma is, in the case of, yeah.
Okay. Well, so I would say that's another point of agreement. It seems to me that the pathological, the systems that produce rapid movement towards social and psychological pathology both facilitate psychopathic behavior and attract the psychopaths. I would say it's both of those. You can have both of those operating at the same time, right? And so then what we have are we have systems of ideas working in the background, and those systems of ideas draw people into their orbit and motivate them to do things that under the influence of other systems of ideas they might not be inclined to do.
So this is as good a place as any to end the podcast portion of the show. Because this is the season finale, we're going to go ahead and give the member show away. People can go to patreon.com/echoplex and just download the whole video and audio of the whole thing tonight. We're actually going to watch the rest of this. I know it's kind of, dare I say, boring. But this being the season finale, we can't possibly only listen to 51 minutes of this and take these people grossly out of context. So that's that. It's been a fun year here on the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We've widened the scope of the people that we talk about, but we came right back to the very beginning here with this particular piece of content. And we'll see what's going on in the new year. Me and HK are probably going to have a little meeting about branding and that kind of stuff. Things might change a little bit, but not too much, because this show's been pretty successful, especially when you compare it to some of our other misguided attempts at podcasting. So just everybody who's listening on the pod, thank you very much. Consider, while you're over there at Patreon, joining, or even better, go to eplex.store and join over there. You get the same benefits the patrons do, plus you get discounts anytime you buy anything from our shop, which is actually a pretty cool thing for us to be able to do. Shout out to Patreon. They've made this year amazing. They've allowed me to pretty much go full time on this. So people who are watching live, just stick around. I got to change the color of the lights in the room. Got to change the content of my beverage. And we'll be back to watch the rest of this in red light. It'll be the last time we play Boomers by Periscope, I think, this year. Be right back.